Dr. Jazz.
But man, I'll just jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, my story with you is like I bought a couple of years ago the content provider CD. In New York, it was when I was visiting New York, and I put that stuff on, and I was like, man, that first track was Keep the Fool, right? I think it is. 15,
oh yeah.
15/4,
Yep.
I think, or I think it's 15. Maybe I was wrong. That groove though.
Oh yeah, you're right. It's 15.
Yeah, right. And I wanted to start this talk like what's happening with you as a band leader, and is the group, this quartet, still alive, or are you also planning some other things, or what's happening there?
Yeah. The quick answer is I'm not sure what's happening with me as a band leader at the moment. I'm definitely, there's a percussion quintet that like the pandemic just threw everything off, I had various plans, and they got thrown. The thing that's definitely happening is the Forest, my percussion quintet, which is a cooperative venture, though I happen to be the one who started it, and I wrote a suite that we performed on the West Coast, and I might as well just talk about the Forest for a second. So the Forest is it's a percussion group with Gustavo Aguilar, Leah Bowden, Leslie Mock, and Michael Wimberly, and me. And we formed in 2021, and then we came together and performed and recorded in 2022. And our first piece of music we did was basically a suite that I composed based on the music of Ed Blackwell and Don Cherry from the Moo first part and the Moo recordings from Paris in 1969. And those recordings are of great personal significance to me, as is Ed Blackwell, who I studied with for
I want to go there later. I want to ask you about him.
Most of a decade. And so it was really fun for me to like dive into this music that had been in my brain for like almost 50 years, really for the first time, and like say like, okay, what can I do with this, and also how can I bring attention to Blackwell and Cherry. So anyway, the Forest is a group that I'm really involved in, and we're going to be doing another tour in this October in Arizona, and we're playing Edge Fest and Bennington College. So we're getting around a bit, and we'll do some new material and some of the Ed Blackwell related material. And then we've also got brewing. We're trying to do a Boom project, because we have a lot of relationship with Boom. Warren Smith was our guest. Was one of our guest performers, and we did a Boom piece that Warren Smith wrote in 1969 on the record that's not out yet, and in our performances. So we're really psyched about that, and we're trying to get more Boom material together and do it in the Midwest next year. And one of our members, Leah Bowden, she wrote her doctoral dissertation on Boom, and she handled Warren Smith's archives. So she's kind of the official resident expert who's really thought through Boom thoroughly. But for the rest of us, Michael and I particularly have really strong connections with Warren, and Michael with Joe Chambers as well. And the group concept as a whole, like we feel like Boom's neglected. Nobody's been able to kind of follow up on that. And there's been a real uprising of percussion ensembles in mainly coming from the new music world lately, but without the African diasporic aesthetic sensibility, which is so
Oh
important.
man, yeah, that's
And
yeah.
how can you do percussion without dealing with that in many ways? So anyway, we're kind of, that's what that's kind of about, and we're also doing a collaboration with a percussionist, musician, storyteller from the Spokane Nation, who's runs the what's it called, the Native American Studies program at Northern Arizona University. And we've just begun jamming with him. So we've got another project that's materialized that I'm really excited about. It sounds great. I mean, we were planning here. We're gonna play somewhere in August, rehearsing, and Chad brings a whole nother element to it that's exciting. Okay, so that's my quick forest spiel, and I'm very involved in that these days.
Did you record already, by the way, this one, or will you?
Yes, we record. We're going to try to have a CD out October 1st.
Oh man, beautiful.
It's got the group plus Warren Smith and JD Perrin. JD is another close friend and collaborator. Yeah, so we spent 2 days in the studio. John Rosenberg recorded it and produced it, so it'll be slammed.
Fantastic, man.
And I don't have the details out about exactly how it's coming out, but it's July, the end of July, so it's going to get nailed down quick. It's ready to go.
Beautiful.
So that's the forest. Actually, I just played with Briggan Krauss yesterday. It was the first time he'd been over here.
Oh, really?
Duo.
Oh man,
it was amazing. It was
he's a monster.
Really. Oh man, yeah. It was just great, and it was the first time he'd been here since the pandemic. In my house, I've seen him a few times, but we hadn't played. And I definitely want to play some more duo with him because it's just such a long-standing musical relationship. We were just like, we dialed right in, and it was amazing. And he's amazing.
Yeah, he
did a solo show I saw a couple months ago at a little gallery in Brooklyn, where he just did like really subtle, microtonal, multiphonic, very controlled, almost drone stuff. On the whole thing was alto saxophone, and it blew me away. What he can do in that context is amazing.
Yeah.
And when we were yesterday, I was playing drum set, and we were going all over the place. But also my timpani. I don't know if you can see back there. I got a timpani, and I got a big gong from that used to be J.D. Perrin's gong.
Wow.
So Brig and I'm using that, and I really like playing in my house at this point because I don't have to I can't even get the timpani out of this room without taking my door apart. So it's cool to play here and have some of those things at my disposal. But then content provider, and for those who don't know, that's my quartet with Briggan and Ingrid Laubrock and Brandon Seabrook and me. We've made 2 CDs, and I've got the itch. For a while in the pandemic, I wasn't band leading, and I really need to do some stuff in those sorts of directions. And I bumped into Ingrid a couple times recently, and there's now a jazz club around the corner from my house, which is amazing because there's nothing like that in this part of Brooklyn for the longest time. I've lived here 20 years, and anyway, now it's called Bar Bayou, and the Owl Parlor is also a couple blocks away. But so this is kind of amazing. And I got to talk to Brandon and just sort of figure out what I might want to do next. And then I've got these other conversations going with people that haven't come to formation yet, but Alexis Marcello is another person who I play with a lot, great piano player, and he may be known to Europeans for his recent work with James Brandon Lewis. They've been in, I don't know where exactly they've been, but it's quite possible Maribor or Ljubljana or something.
He was in Ljubljana, I think it was Ljubljana,
yeah. So Alexis and I, we got we're kind of slowly brewing on something, and man, I was just hanging out with my friend Angelica Sanchez, and
Ooh,
we were
okay.
like, we gotta play, and I'm like, yeah, like I don't know. I've been a little diverted from band leading and recording production of my own work because of the pandemic, and also because I've gotten really involved in some other related projects by leading a nonprofit organization, and I can talk more about that later too. Oh, the other project that's definitely on the close to the front burner. I've led a large ensemble, a tentet.
Wow. Really?
And we did one body of music. I think the group's amazing. You know, an amazing group. It's like the first project we did. Both everyone in content provider was in it. Jason Kao Hwang, the violinist,
Sure.
Melanie Dyer, the violist, We Free Strings, Ken Filiano, they're all in it. Frank Lacey is in it, the trombone player.
Man, okay.
J.D. Perrin is in it. And trying to think of anybody else. Alexis Marcello is in it.
Wow.
And so that was around 2016. We did some stuff, live performances, didn't record. Then we did another one without the saxophones, and instead we had Stephanie Griffin, who had been the original violist. She was in it, and Tomika Reed was in it on cello.
Wow. Beautiful.
And Thomas, Thomas Heberer, the cornet player. He was
amazing.
I forgot, because earlier we had Stephanie Richards playing trumpet on some of our previous dates in Brooklyn. Anyway, so I was working on getting the whole tentet to do a tour, and it was going to happen. It was going to happen in the fall of 2020. And we had some gigs at Edge Fest in Ann Arbor and Oberlin College.
Oh.
You know, it's gonna be a really big project. And I had one small grant, but the rest of the money I'm pretty sure was gonna work. Of course, the pandemic hit, and it just knocked. There was no planning for something in October 2020 when all the work really had to be done in March, April, May. It was cool. But at some point, like maybe in May, after I'd been sitting around for a couple months, and I had this one grant from the Brooklyn Arts Council for like $5,000. I was like, man, I can't, that's not enough money for recording and touring and hotels and flights, food. But I realized I'd just done a project, another large ensemble project, where it all happened on video, and all the musicians recorded themselves and then sent the videos into to Lee Odom, the saxophone player, who's also a video editor, director, and she put it all together. And so I was like, oh wow. And I started thinking, like, if I have everyone just record themselves at their house, forget the video, I'll make my own video, and I'll mix all the audio and set it to the video that I make. And I realized $5,000 and maybe a little bit more. It was realistic. Was very realistic and doable. And without a week of hotels every night for 10 people and all that other stuff, it completely became possible. So we went forward, and I've done about 90% of it. And I put a work in progress clip on the Soup and Sound online Vimeo page in March 2021, and I was ready to. It had everybody except for J.D. Perrin on it, and I need to re-record some drum stuff because I just kind of put down a scratch track, and it's not very well recorded. But it was really cool, and what the result is going to be, it's basically like a 75-minute art film, all with this nature, slow, kind of like a slow food equivalent of video that I shot on the coast of Maine when I was when I was there several times on an island.
I love Maine, man.
Really, really beautiful, and
Yeah.
and again, it's like Tamika Reed and Jason and Stephanie Griffin and all these guys, all these people. So I'm very excited about that. But about a week after I had shared the work in progress, right when I was ready to take the final step on the thing, my mom passed away, and it was very, very sudden. So that knocked me out of production for several months as I dealt with that, with my mom's death, and by the time I was kind of ready to start doing things again, that's when I learned the Forest, this percussion quintet, had gotten this big grant that was going to allow us to, for me to compose the music, for us to do this complicated tour and recording and workshops and stuff. So I got really the Forest took my attention. So this tentet project has been on the back burner, and I'm hoping I can complete it before the end of the year.
Man, wow. Yeah.
So artistically, and then I'm also, I'm playing a lot with Jason Hwang.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
As always, and various ad hoc improvisation things that, I'm a leader of that. I'm like it's anarchist music collaboration, but we're all leaders of that kind of stuff. But as far as like a band, and I'm really feeling the itch, and I kind of want to do some stuff that connects a little bit more with my jazz back, more in an overt way as a jazz musician, because I feel I've kind of been neglecting that a little bit. But the other stuff that I'm doing is really fun, and I'm very into that. I'm trying to think of what else.
Oh man, that's a lot, all right.
I'm probably missing some stuff.
You've been busy, it's just like you just have to get it out for the rest of the world to listen to hear it. Yeah.
I haven't been so busy with my own musical creation of my own musical works as a composer, band leader, but in a lot of other ways. I don't know, I play in this big band that J.D. Perrin leads, where all the horns in the big band are clarinets of different shapes and sizes. Most of them are not the regular B flat clarinet. It's mostly alto, bass, contrabass, B flat, double contrabass, all these other things. With Alexis Marcello, Hill Green, and me as the rhythm section. And JD's amazing, and we just played some big band music by the great composer James Jabbo Ware, who most people don't know about internationally, but he's a really important St. Louis Black Artist Group guy to come out of that scene, and wrote really beautiful music. We did a James Reese Europe concert, which that was like a revelation to me. I'd never, I just heard his name, but this guy was so significant historically. But he passed away just shortly before the era of recorded music became commercially viable. So and before they could really capture a band like he led, apparently the whole drums, it was like a marching band, and the whole drum section, it was a black peopled marching band on a level of like John Philip Sousa and symphonies, and James Reese Europe was going to be a superstar. He would be like Duke Ellington if his life hadn't been cut short. I don't know, reading about the work and listening to a little bit and stuff, it's mind blowing. And so that was a really fun project, getting to play that stuff with many challenges. So anyway, okay. So there's kind of a lot of my current musical doings, but mainly the focus recently has been more on the things that I do through Continuum Culture and Arts, the nonprofit that I founded and run, and Continuum's recent expansion. We're very excited about stuff. and shit. I'll let you ask questions, but since I'm on a roll,
Oh no, man! I'm like, you know, it's like an impro. You have like, I'm not shit. It's going. It's a good impro. So I'm like, okay, I'll let you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, know. It's a little more. I'm doing a little more solo for a duet than
that's good, man.
It's entirely feel comfortable with.
No, beautiful. I just wanted to ask you here, like, I mean, already before, like, when you say you compose, like, how do you compose actually?
Oh, usually? Great.
What's your process there?
Yeah. Composing was a real stretch for me. I'm a drummer. I took a lot of drum lessons with Dave Coleman in Seattle, he was really super important to me, and with Ed Blackwell, and occasionally with some other people. Alan Dawson I took a lesson with, and Steve McCraven. So, and I was not a music student in college, or I never studied composition. I never learned to play, took piano lessons or learned to play other instruments. I kind of taught myself some piano, and I love playing the piano. And in fact, with the Forest recently, I even played the piano at Lincoln Center. So
okay, come on.
Now, like, all right, I'm a pianist.
I made it.
but yeah, right. But of course, when I talk to any real pianist, I'm like,
yeah.
So I don't know. But you know, all my time growing up as a teenager, I was listening to stuff, and I was, you know, all kinds of stuff.
What were you listening to? Yeah, I mean, what was in your playlist when you were a teenager, or what got you into improv music, especially? I mean, this question really.
Yeah, all kinds of jazz I was listening to. As soon as I heard Jack DeJohnette, Max Roach, Buddy Rich, very early on, as soon as I heard these drummers, I had been listening to pop music on the radio from about 6th grade, when my grandma gave me a radio, until 8th grade, when I really was like, holy shit, these jazz guys make the rock guys sound like children. That was my attitude at the time. It later changed. But I was just, I don't know, from the time, so this is about like maybe 1970. No, I meant earlier than that. I meant like 77 or something. I'm not sure. When I was in 7th grade or 8th grade, I really became obsessed with jazz, and I had no previous exposure, and my family was not very musical, so it was a lot of work for me, and so everything I was just absorbing on an equal basis, from Grover Washington Jr. to Old and New Dreams, Count Basie, Buddy Rich, Stan Kenton. I don't know. For some reason, I kind of avoided some of the main people like Coltrane, Duke, Charlie Parker, and Louis Armstrong for a while. But through Herbie Hancock, I got into Miles. I was really into Herbie Hancock because so my best friend.
It was like Headhunters in the 70s, right? I mean, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My best friend, where I was growing up, Bainbridge Island, Washington, was this drummer Michael Serene.
Oh, sure, man, I love Michael. Yeah.
So we've known each other since like age 8, and we were really tight after 4th grade. So that's like age 10. We were total pals, and we did everything together: sports, goofing around as numbskull kids, and music. So we were always feeding off each other. And Mike's grandfather was a swing era tenor saxophone player. His mom loved jazz and had records around. And his sister had Herbie Hancock's Headhunter album lying on her floor, and we would sneak into her room and listen to this record, which just like, that was the coolest stuff I ever heard. It just amazed me.
Yeah. So
that's really how I got into jazz, was at first because Serene and his family thought jazz was cool. And it includes Dixieland too. Like, if the Dixieland band was on a July 4th parade float through our town, man, we thought that was really hip. It was a bunch of 50-year-olds or 60 or 40-year-olds. I didn't even notice that. I was just like, wow, look what they can do. Look what musicians can do. I had this idea really early on that, after I was 12 years old, I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my life, and I never made a plan B. I was like, wow, music will be infinite, and I'll be able to learn. It wasn't even that I wanted to play and do it, but it was because I could see that the learning possibilities were infinite, and I would always be challenged and stimulated, and that would I'd never hit the end of that if I did the right thing. So anyway, I got to thank Serene's family for part of that, and certainly my own too. But so I would go with Mike Serene. We'd go to lots of concerts, and we heard Air, and like when we were like 16 or 15 or something. Every other person in the audience for everything we went to was like 15 years older than us, so we were these kids, and there'd be all these adults at these concerts. And I remember Air. There was a Jack DeJohnette special edition concert, probably around 1980. It was the first group he had. And this was Arthur Blythe, Chico Freeman, Warren. David Murray wasn't on the tour. Oh man, Julian Priester, who taught in Seattle at Cornish College. This is the first jazz concert I ever went to. It was a trio of Julian Priester, Gary Peacock, and Dave Coleman Jr., my drum teacher's son.
Man, beautiful.
And Mike Serene and I were so young at that point. It was our first time going into Seattle by ourselves and going to a concert. And we arrived at the concert. We had to take a ferry from the island we lived on, get to Seattle, and then somehow get up to where the concert was. I think we walked. It was like a couple miles, but we walked because we didn't know how to use the buses. So we went up there, and we were like we arrived 3 hours early. But we knew where it was, and there was a side door that was open. Nobody was around. So we just went in, and there was Julian Priester, Gary Peacock, and Dave Coleman Jr. rehearsing the music on stage. So we just sat down and watched them. No one said a word to us. No one kicked us out. And the main thing I remember hearing Gary Peacock's tone.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I mean, I'd never heard anything. We were these hicks from a island, and now we're sitting 25 feet from Gary Peacock. Oh my God. And Julian, it was all his tunes, and he was in a M1 he was still kind of post M1 phase. He was playing through these, he had all these foot pedals. So he was processing his trombone sounds, kind of like Love Love, he was, the album Love Love on ECM, which is
that's
great.
Amazing.
We were they played the song Love Love, that was one of the things. Gary on his acoustic bass, though, not the upright. Man, I was just like, it literally that changed my life, because I'd also, in addition to hearing actually Julian and Gary's sound, just being around people of their level of accomplishment, and I don't know, we were into another thing over on Bainbridge Island. It was over there. It was more about sailboats and screwing around in sports, and suddenly we were in the presence of these guys who were like, Zen masters. And actually in the concert, I remember later during the concert, I had the thought literally where I was like, wow, I didn't know music could sound like this.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
So anyway, this is all about how I got started. So I'm not a schooled composer, but I was listening to so many different things. And I'm talking also about like Lou Levy and West Coast jazz. Some of these cats were around. A lot of Concord jazz influences. Whenever people would come to town, like Dexter Gordon, Betty Carter, I'd try to make it. Me and my friends were really into. We had a saxophone playing friend, and we were really into Grover Washington Jr., the Jeff Lorber fusion, and Kenny Gorlick was in the band at the time before he became Kenny G. We dug that stuff. Dennis Bradford on drums. All the local guys, they were our heroes. Oh man, who are some of them? I mean, Julian for sure. Jake Clayton, Jerry Grinelli. I mean, they were heroes who were already had a foot in a door internationally. But shoot, I should be able to remember other people. Locally, I really like, Buddy Catlett, the bass player.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a lot of stuff. So I would hear Mal Waldron or these different things, and I was buying records, and we had a piano at our house because my brother was the piano player. He was actually the musician. I was into some other stuff, but that was earlier. And so now I'd go hear Jack DeJohnette, I'd go hear Julian Priester, Air, and I'd come home and I'd like put my hands on the keyboard and try to make some of those sounds. And I developed a thing. My parents loved it. I just was I had a good ear and I was musical. And so I'd find like maybe play I didn't know what I was doing, but some fifths in my left hand, and I'd do kind of some modal harmonies on top of that. And I'd shift it up half a step, or I'd move to some other key center and do this. And I do it usually late at night, and my parents would be in the other room. My mom always said she just loved that, and I developed my own kind of way around the piano. And then that was probably when I was around 15 or 16 years old. Then I got into college, which is another story. Ed Blackwell taught at Wesleyan University. I found this out by reading an article in Modern Drummer magazine, and I was like, okay, that's where I want to go to college.
So you knew who he was, right? I mean, Ed.
Oh yeah, he was a major hero of mine because, and this is kind of a funny story too, but I like these stories because it's how culture is actually transmitted. It's not about, to me, it's not about school and official sort of certification pedagogy kind of stuff. It should be happening on a personal, spiritual, emotional level. So my grandmother gave me a radio for like Christmas, maybe when I was in 5th grade in 1976, I think it was. And up until then, I had no real connection to American popular music. It was something on other people's radios, and I wasn't really paying attention. My mom liked classical music. I didn't like that at all. So I wasn't very attuned in that way. But the radio opened up a lot of, I quickly discovered the pop music this is 1976, I guess. So from then until about 78, I was listening to top 40 radio like all the time, and I loved it. And a lot of different things, but I just liked the sound. And later I realized, yes, because people were being really creative in the studio. They were great musicians, all that stuff. But one of the cool things that happened was, along with I'd go to bed every night with the radio on, kind of by my ear, and I'd be listening to sports talk radio or a basketball game, or the best thing was occasionally a jazz radio station would be on. It was usually maybe a once or twice a week thing. And one night I was listening to this radio station called KRAB, Crab, that was a very community run DIY kind of avant-garde radio station. And they played a song on there with some drumming on it that again, it was like, I was like, wow, what is this? It was so melodic and so complex and so deep. It was different than all the other drumming I'd heard. I was probably already hip to Max Roach, Tony Williams, Jack DeJohnette, Philly Joe, Art Blakey, and of course swing guys like Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson and people in that mode. But this was something else was happening melodically that just like penetrated my soul. And but they played the next song. They didn't say who it was, or they didn't say anything about it. And I was just like, what was that? For a year went by. And then the same song came on. They played the same song. And this time they said Eddie Blackwell. And I was like, okay. They probably said the name of the song, but I forgot that and the other musicians in the record. So then I told my drum teacher, and Dave Coleman, he made me a mixtape of 90 minutes of Blackwell playing with Ornette. So I got to listen to the early This Is Our Music and Ornette, and there's probably some other early Ornette. Oh, Science Fiction, some of that stuff was on there. I got to listen to a lot of that stuff without knowing what record it was or what the titles were. I just listened. But I couldn't find the record. The first record I bought was the Don Cherry, Ed Blackwell, Moo, the two Moo records.
Yeah.
And that was close. And that really blew me away. And that changed me forever. And still, I'm spreading the gospel on that shit in a variety of ways. Including I'm gonna do a Swing U course at Jazz at Lincoln Center in November and December upcoming, and it's gonna be about Ed Blackwell. And so naturally Moo is gonna be part of that.
Sure.
And I bought these other Ed Blackwell records and never couldn't find it. And it took a couple of years, but finally I bought the one on ECM called Old and New Dreams, and there it was. It's called Togo. Yeah. And do-dee-da-da, do-dee-da-da-bum, ba-da-dee-dee-da-da-da. And they use that theme, which I'm told is a West African melody, it's got a name like Lament or some sort of, I'm sure there's a whole nother context for that theme that they play. But it's theme, drum solo, theme, drum solo, theme, drum solo, theme. And the three drum solos, that's what the whole thing knocked me out. But those three, a piece with three drum solos, that's unusual. How many of those are there? And, but Ed Blackwell was such a master, such a deep, major, one of the greatest drum soloists ever to sit at the drums. So unique, had a unique melodic vision.
Yep.
And they're all tied in with Ornette's philosophy so deep. Anyway, that's what led me when I found out it was Ed Blackwell and what this was. And then I read, even after a couple years after that, or soon after that, I read he taught at a college. That's what got me interested in college. And I was always a really good student, but I was alienated from American culture. I wasn't entirely, of course I was a teenager, nobody is, but I wasn't very together in a lot of ways. But this music and Ed Blackwell's music was like somebody threw a life ring to me. And through the music and through reading things like Malcolm X's autobiography.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And in college, actually what I studied in college was mainly African-American studies and American studies, kinds of stuff, interdisciplinary courses about the culture of the United States, which was, I grew up in this 70s post-war kind of a golden age for the US in terms of its own self-image as a superpower and a thriving economy and stuff. That was soon to change in many ways. But a lot of people didn't realize that I was sort of ahead of the curve on that. So I just inherently didn't buy that propaganda, and it wasn't until I got tuned into Malcolm X and learning about African American history, literature, culture, which perfectly complemented my interest in jazz. That's when the world began to start to make a little bit of sense to me, and I started to find my personal voice beyond and including music. So it was cool that I'm really grateful I wound up at Wesleyan, because I was able to get a really good liberal arts education. But that was just the formal shit and the degree. That was not the real education. Was I got to hang with Ed Blackwell
How did that happen? I mean, how did you?
4 years, and after that, and so he taught at Wesleyan University. He was on the faculty as I forget what his position was called. This is in Middletown, Connecticut, about 2 hours outside of New York City, halfway between New York and Boston. Well, he had I think his kidneys failed in 19. I'm not sure what the year exactly was. I'd have to look it up. It's like around 1972, maybe 1973, and it immediately he almost killed him, I think, and he immediately had to stop performing and everything because he had to be on dialysis. Like, I may be wrong about this, but it was like maybe like 8 hours a day every other day or something. So that kind of interfered with his touring and performing, it being in New York and stuff. But my understanding is the dialysis sort of technology improved.
Yeah.
And so there's a gap in his discography and the playing that I'm aware of from about 72 until Old and New Dreams. Maybe there was something else around then. I think they recorded their first Old and New Dreams record for Black Saint in 76, and it came out in 77.
Yep.
So I guess the dialysis stuff came through, but still he was doing a lot of dialysis, and he had to, when he went on tour at some point, he had to have it connected with hospitals and stuff so he could go deal with his kidneys quite often and then go to a club and play.
That's and stuff.
Yeah. And then by the time I showed up August of 1983, and I just read in a magazine that he taught there, and I think after I showed up in the course book that was being offered for the semester, like I was relieved. Oh, good, he's actually here, because it could have been a thing where he was like
listed.
They did use his name and image, and not, in my opinion, compensate him properly. It was really bullshit. But fortunately for me, I was able to walk over, to his house and ring the doorbell, and this hero appears. I'm just like, gulp. I'd like to take drum lessons if I can. So that's how it started, and that was an amazing experience. And not only the lessons, he was really thorough and exacting, and that was beautiful and just what I needed, and it was so fun. But also he told me in one of our maybe the first lesson, he was like, he told me a couple things, kind of expanding on the lessons. He was like, here, there's these books you should go get, The Face of Black Music and As Serious as Your Life. So they're both books by the British photographer Valerie Wilmer, and so I immediately went and got those and devoured those. And he figures prominently in both of those, so they were important to him. And but that was cool. But the other thing he told me was, anytime I'm playing a gig, somewhere, just let me know in advance and I'll put you on the list. And so I was like, holy shit. I mean, that was like, that right there.
Yeah.
That was like worth as much as my Wesleyan education, maybe. Not quite. Well, I don't know. Because there was some other stuff I needed to learn. Again, not school stuff. But so that meant, and I don't know why this was, I never saw any other of the Wesleyan students at any other of his gigs. It was, but I was already he was a hero of mine from like age 16. So to me, this was just, the goose was laying some golden eggs, man.
Imagine, yeah.
I wasn't gonna get rid of those eggs or nothing. So I don't know. The first thing I did was I heard Old and New Dreams. I went every night to Sweet Basil for a week. I see the Sweet Basil T-shirt behind you, and I noticed that right when we got on. So yeah, that was probably my first time ever at Sweet Basil, and I was underage because the drinking age was, they were moving it. It was 18 when I was 17, then it was 19 when I was 18, but that didn't matter. They weren't checking in New York in those days. But I sat at a table right next to the bandstand, and it's where, so I'd be sitting there on the breaks with Charlie Hayden and Dewey Redman and Blackwell.
Wow.
Judy Sneed, she wouldn't remember me, but they would play. I later learned, okay, she was kind of like their, actually, I don't know what her role was, maybe an agent or something, and friend, but she lived in the house Charlie Parker lived in. I only recently learned, and I think that's where they would rehearse, and they would hang out. It was on the south side of Tompkins Square Park in Manhattan. So anyway, she was there, and then all these other people would come by, like Branford Marsalis came by. This is 1984, I think, maybe 83. No, 84, maybe 85. I think it was 1984. So, there was a New Orleans connection. And so Branford, I remember coming by to, give props to Blackwell, his New Orleans predecessor. Blackwell, who was a dear friend of his own father, Ellis Marsalis, because they played together since high school and made Blackwell's first record, the American Jazz Quintet. They did that together. Okay, who else was there? Jamil Moondock, I remember meeting him there.
Really? Oh, wow.
There's probably others. I'll think of them after the interview stops. But it was kind of star-studded, and that week, man, it made such an impression on me, because all four of those guys in Old and New Dreams were just so amazing,
really big names.
so amazing. And Don Cherry had this charisma and just the way he was kind of like Miles, his dress and his presence, he was just super hip. And he had this griot world music thing happening too. And he'd play his pocket trumpet and then go over to the piano and pound out some chords and start Thelonious Monk, and play some monk tune, or he'd summon these other worlds and energies. And he dressed, his dress was beyond my concept. And all these guys, I was like 18 or 19 years old from this island off of Seattle, this rural, I was being in a big city was so new to me, and it was an intense period. But so that was one of the things. And I could go on about the David Murray Quartet, the group that made the record Morning Song, which I loved and listened to in high school. Mal Waldron. God, what else did Blackwell do? Oh, well, he was also playing with Bill Barron, who taught at Wesleyan, and Bill O played, and Wes Brown, and Fred Simmons, the piano player, who was really great, not well known. So they'd do stuff around, and I don't know. I went to every Ed Blackwell thing I could go to. A duo with Leo Smith.
Really? Oh, wow, man. Beautiful.
Once in Boston. I went up to Boston. I was on a bus and I looked out the car, and I see Blackwell sitting in the car. Someone's driving him up to Boston. There's a lot of memories about that stuff.
Beautiful. Wow.
But I forget. So composing, I was just like, I had all this world of stuff I was listening to, and I had a relationship with the piano where I could try to put my fingers in the right places to get some of the sounds I was hearing.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Mal Waldron was a really big inspiration to me. I really got into his playing, especially on the Eric Dolphy Booker Little Quintet.
Yeah.
Recording,
oh man. Yeah. That's awesome.
Which Blackwell was very proud of that. And one of the other things Blackwell would do is I'd go over for a lesson and we'd listen and then talk about it.
Oh,
and I'd usually be I'd be dumbfounded. I was not a very good talker about what I just listened to. I was just like, yeah, that's great. He'd be like, what do you think? But I don't know. Mal Waldron would play like these kind of dissonant things in his chords, and I just really like that in and out kind of stuff. So then I was after a few years at Wesleyan, there was a group that the trombonist, composer, and another one of my mentors who helped me in life in a lot of ways, in school, beyond school, etc. Bill Lowe, and he's kind of known for playing with. He was in Henry Threadgill's sextet, and he played with Frank Foster's Loud Minority, James Jabo Ware's Me, We, and Them. He would sub with stuff. He was on the scene. And he played, I don't know, I should probably be able to name a few other things he did over the years, but he was a really interesting intellectual, interesting musician, mentor. I forget. So they would play too. Bill Barron, Bill Lowe, Fred Simmons, Wes Brown on bass, and Ed Blackwell, and I'd follow them around. Oh, the composing thing. So Bill Lowe, that was it. So Bill Lowe started a group for us students, just like after it wasn't for credit or anything. And even the credit courses in music at Wesleyan, I did not take them for credit because you could take too many of them and then it would screw you up. So I did almost all. I started taking them for credit and then I was like, okay, no more of that. So it was all kind of off the books, which was better because the real education was not to be happen in the classroom. It was interaction with people who knew what they're doing one-on-one and on a bandstand. So Bill Lowe started this group of students that we would each bring a composition in and play each other's compositions. And I remember I had no doubt I was going to bring stuff in, but I don't think I had ever composed anything at that point. So I wrote a piece. The first one I wrote was actually called First One. and I brought it in, and and I had to learn, the saxophone goes in B flat, so I have to move everything down a step or up a step, and the alto E flat. I had a lot of basic stuff like that I had to contend with. But after we played a couple of my tunes, 2 or 3 of them, I realized like it hadn't hurt me one bit that I hadn't been studying a pitch instrument, or that I hadn't ever studied composition, because the other people in the group were all piano players and saxophone. There was one drummer, Ward Griffiths. She was a year ahead of me, and she was kind of a protege of Blackwell. She was kind of a star. She was very good. But the other people, they were doing all this studying, but I realized actually I thought my compositions were more interesting than theirs. And it's because, one, I developed my own thing, and it was purely coming. It wasn't attached to an instrument. It was that I could play. So I had none of the limits of my abilities as a player.
Yeah.
But more important than that was that it was purely coming out of my imagination of sound. And my references were so rich at that point because I was fucking obsessed. And I was so into jazz and listening to all these different things. So I brought that to what I was doing. And then the other thing was, I realized that actually playing drums was an advantage to me because I was hearing things in a really different way than the other people. I heard the rhythm of a melody. In fact, the rhythm itself was melody to me, which sounds to me kind of like something Ornette might say, or like rhythm's kind of its own melody. So but then also I was hearing pitches, I don't know, in different ways, and harmonies in some different ways. But being a drummer and creating these really rhythmic kinds of phrases and the relationships between them and sections of songs and how energy moves from one thing to another, that's all what I deal with when I'm playing drum set and I'm learning somebody's composition. It's all about energy and moving from one thing to another and what works here given what's happened before and what happens next or whatever. So, and I remember Bill Lowe being like, I had this one chord. It was like a major minor chord, and some whole tone kind of stuff. And I remember Bill Lowe knew I hadn't taken these classes, and he was like, Drury, where do you learn this shit? He was the harmonic stuff I was dealing with in actuality was the stuff Bill Barron was teaching to people, after a couple of years or something, flat sharp 11s and flat 13s, whole tone, major minor kind of clash sort of stuff. I still, that's still in the music that I write. But anyway, I quickly got confidence because I was hearing what we were all doing. I was like, well, okay. Even though I was so nervous that first thing when I actually handed out paper with pitches on it to real musicians, real saxophone player, and a piano player, and a bass, and a guitar. Because I was like, man, okay, I know I'm pretending here. Here's this thing that I did. Let's see what we think. But after that first experience, when I came away from it, like, okay, that kind of worked. And then a couple more, I was like, all right, I'm on it. So from then on, I was like, I had confidence about it because I saw like, oh, I've got my own voice, and it's a special thing. And
that's so important.
I'll mention the first project I did though, where I was writing my own music. Maybe this is too much about my past. I should let you take the lead.
No. But I mean, I wanted to ask you about, speaking of your projects, like, how did you connect? Because you went to Seattle, right, back? And you connected with Briggan and, all these.
Yeah.
Like, Chris Speed later and Myra Melford and all. How did you start making all these bands and connections? I mean. Okay,
so I finished college, and right at the end, I met the woman who would be my wife, who was just starting. So I stayed in Middletown, Connecticut it's like a total of 8 years or 9 with a year off in the middle. So I was there until 1992. Then Alyssa and I hitchhiked for a year.
Wow.
We did a lot of odd jobs, and we saved $15,000, and we spent it all traveling and doing street theater in Central America and some traveling in Europe as well. And then we were going to be broke. We knew it. We were going to be broke at the end of the trip. And where did we want to be? On the East Coast? Excuse me. On the East Coast? Or back in Seattle, where my parents lived, and we had, I had a lot of connections, and it's really beautiful. And I was like, that would be Seattle. Let's go back there. That'll be an easier landing when we're broke. So we were there. We arrived like August 93, and we left about 5 years later, I guess. November 98 is when we moved to New York. So I was there for 5 years. It was great. I showed up and I didn't know anybody. And so one of the things I did was I asked Mike Serene. I was like, man, he'd lived there more recently than I had. I was like, who's around? Who's happening? And I should get in touch with. And the one person I remember he mentioned was this saxophone player named Briggan Krauss. So and somehow I knew of Eyvind Kang too. I think I asked maybe another friend of mine who was living in Seattle. I probably asked the same question, and he told me Eyvind Kang was really happening. So, and this wasn't for a while though, because I showed up in 93, but I wasn't really active in Seattle until 1990, like halfway into 94, I think. But the first gig I got, Eyvind set up, and it was a quartet of Eyvind on violin, Briggan Krauss on alto saxophone, Tim Young on guitar, and me.
Wow.
And at a little teeny place called the Penny University Cafe. And we had 2 gigs there 2 weeks apart. I don't know what night, some night of the week. And they were really amazing. I sure wish we'd recorded that, because it was that was an awesome group. But I learned in that run that Briggan was planning to move to New York right after this run. So Briggan and I had 2 weeks of overlap in Seattle, and then he was off to New York. So, but then when Briggan would come back, though, he would email me and be like, "Hey, man, you want to set something up?"
Okay.
And specifically, I remember the thing he wanted to set up that we did a number of times was a trio with Wayne Horvitz.
Wow, really? Oh man, beautiful.
And so Wayne would play his DX7, his Yamaha keyboard, nothing else. And also, by the way, really fucking loud. So we were like blasting. It was sort of like, and it was all improvised. We played several times in Seattle, and once up in Vancouver with Francois Houle sitting in. And but man, it was really cool. I think we might have even played 2 consecutive nights at this theater called the Compound in Ballard, where I used to self-produce music shows. But it was really fun playing with Wayne and Briggan. It just like was a new level for me. Wayne was amazing. But when I got to Seattle, like, you know, I know I was kind of a breath of fresh air to some people, because I was bringing this New York Ed Blackwell kind of energy, and I was like as serious as your life, you know. And in the Seattle scene, I ultimately got frustrated with it. There were a lot of great musicians, and many of whom I'm still in touch with, but there just wasn't like a critical mass to keep me feeling stimulated. And so I found after a couple of years that, man, I have to do all the work to generate my own scene and my own momentum around me. And then so it didn't take very long, because I remember I went to hear Human Feel play at the Earshot Jazz Festival in 95 or probably 96. I don't remember when exactly. And I'd read about these guys in the Earshot Jazz magazine, and they were really hyped. And I was like, yeah, you know, this is a small pond, and there's a lot of big fish here, and I'm really not impressed with the big fish. There's, you know, some people are good and can do it or whatever, but no, you know, nothing's really, you know, doing it for me that much. So I went and heard Human Feel, and because Matthew Sperry, the bass player, also reinforced it. He was like, "Oh, you should check out Jim Black. I heard him in Vancouver last year. He's really happening." So I went to hear Human Feel, and they blew my head off. It was like, here were my peers, people I'd never. Yeah, Brad Shep. I knew Brad Shep. He wasn't in that band. It was Kurt Rosenwinkel. Here were 4 guys, 3 of whom I'd never heard of before. One of them, Andrew D'Angelo, I had heard of before because he was a little kid and grew up across the street from my cousin. So I used to hear about the D'Angelos, but I never went over there. We never played with them, but I knew about, like when we were like 10 years old or something, I knew about Andrew. But anyway, I didn't know anything about their music. I heard these guys, and they were like, I was immediately like, oh shit, they're doing what I should be doing. Like, how did I miss? They came up from this area. They're my age. They are playing at such a high level. I didn't know people were doing this. I didn't know any of like the people I came up with were doing this. And I was really like, kind of, I was almost troubled by it, because I really felt like I'd missed something important. And here these guys were at a stage fully developed on the top level. I thought it was truly great music they were making.
Yeah. Good band.
And it was that moment I was like, okay, I decided I'm moving to New York. I'm in the wrong place. But it took a few years, because my wife had just started graduate school at the University of Washington. But then, you know, from my regular gigs with Briggan when he was in Seattle, and then once I heard those guys, I was like, okay, I made a record called Polish Theater Posters, my first CD. Briggan and Eyvind are both on that, and Tim Young is on that, as well as Phil Sparks, Brent Arnold, Steve Moore, who became known as Stebmo, and I think maybe he was one of the main people in the band Earth, or and maybe Sun. Oh, I forget what. God, who else? Craig Flory and Wayne Horvitz produced that record. Anyway, that was my first record, Polish Theater Posters. Then for my second, I wanted to make another record, and I got grant money for it from Seattle Arts Commission and stuff. And I had heard my choreographer friend Sherry Cohen she was always turning me on to interesting music, and she was a real cool listener, and we'd collaborate and stuff. She was like, here, like, she had me do a thing with my eyes closed, some kind of dance stuff. And I was on the floor doing this somatic stuff, and the music she had played was Myra Melford's. It was the kind of slow ballad toward the end of Alive in the House of Saints.
Yeah, with Reggie, right? Nicholson and Lindsay
Reggie.
Horner. Yeah, and Lindsay Horner.
Reggie,
yeah, I love that.
And Lindsay Horner, and and it's really fun. Now I see Reggie around, and I'm like, man, great stuff. Thank you. And also Threadgill Sextet with him and Newman Baker,
sure.
and other stuff. Fortunately, I'm glad I get to see Reggie periodically on stage and stuff. But Myra, I really started checking her out, and I was kind of familiar with her because I'd seen her picture in earshot, but I hadn't heard her music. And once I heard her music, I was like, damn. And so I was like, okay, I want to do a record with her, and it's going to be Briggan, Eyvind, Myra, Chris Speed.
Oh yeah, that's the Momentary Lapse, right? That one.
Momentary Lapse.
I love that one, man. That's amazing.
And it was going to be Drew Gress. So I reached out to everybody before I moved to New York, and my plan was I'm going to come to New York and record this, and it's pretty much what happened. Except we couldn't find a time when everyone was in town together. I mean, I had like 2 or 3 years. I mean, maybe I can't remember. Maybe it wasn't even a thing I was going to do when I moved. But yeah, because we recorded it in near Christmas '99. So I had already lived for a year in New York, and I'd probably reached out to them and started trying to figure out when this was going to happen when I wrote my grant in like 97 or something, 96. So, oh man, it was like no one could make it. And then finally, 5 of us, everyone but Drew Gress, could be there, and I needed a bass player. And so I lowered my standards. Okay, not the dream guy, Drew Gress. I'm going to go with somebody who lives.
Yeah.
I'll find a bass player in the neighborhood, and I'm very tongue in cheek because I knew Mark Dresser was in the neighborhood, so he was able to do it. So yeah, that became a Momentary Lapse, and man, that was that. I was very happy. I hear now it's funny, Polish Theater Posters was the first record I ever did. I'm like 100%. I'm really happy with that and proud of that. And I'm also really happy and proud about A Momentary Lapse. And that's actually the record I give to people still 20 years later. It took a while. Yeah, sure. Came out in 23, but it was recorded in 99, almost 2000. But yeah, with Momentary Lapse, I can hear ways, that was before I'd really been part of the New York scene and developed a lot as a player. And so there's things I wouldn't mind doing a little differently in places, but overall, that's just a really personal kind of self beating up level of, you're being your own worst critic, sure, sort of stuff. But yeah, that's where that went. And then coming out of that, I just didn't have the business chops to figure out how to tour with a sextet. So I got one gig in Portugal as a trio and Briggan couldn't make it, unfortunately. So it was Myra, Chris Speed, and me. Wow. And we went to this festival called Jazz in Tondela, and it was great. We played. It was the last year they did the festival, unfortunately. But it was really a beautiful festival, and we were there for like 4 days, just being wined and dined and hanging out. Actually, Jason Hwang coincidentally was there. And Ken Filiano coincidentally was there. I don't think Taylor Hobynum was there, but that would have been, I'm pretty sure this was before. No, I was already playing with Jason. So maybe Tondela was like 2005, I think. Because I think by that point I was already playing with Jason's group.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, yeah, how did you hook up with Jason actually? I mean, since you guys have like a almost 20-year musical relationship going on.
Yeah, it's one of my deepest musical relationships now.
Yeah.
And friendships. And I love Jason and Ken, and particularly because those two have been part of
the trio is amazing, man. Yeah.
All the work we've done in various configurations. But so another important person to me, a mentor, is the saxophone player David Beinman, who led the Brooklyn Saxophone Quartet and various other things. He plays with Royal Hartigan, Blood Drum Spirit to this day. And David's a really interesting composer, saxophonist. And so I met David at Wesleyan, and we did just a lot of like bi-weekly free improvisation playing, which is how I really developed that for the first time. Yeah. He exposed me to Sam Rivers and a lot of stuff for the first time in a more organized way. Like I'd heard Air, and I had heard Julian Priester and various other kind of avant-garde things, but I never felt like I understood it. I respected it, and I knew these people were master musicians. And I remember at the same time I was like, wow, I didn't know music could sound like this at the Julian Priester concert. I was also like, I don't know what they're doing, but these guys are so badass. They are so good. They're like better musicians than anyone I've ever been around. Never mind heavier humans. They were also, on the human level. And I was just like, so at that point I had to be like, I didn't think it sounded good. I didn't like it necessarily, but I was drawn to, it was my path. It was like they were showing me this is it. It wasn't even like I knew that. It was just unconscious. I was like, I got to check this out. And so I did for a long time. And it was really fine. Oh, Jack DeJohnette's special edition. There was things I really loved about that and stuff I couldn't understand. So there were many of these things. And Art Landy, that was another one. Yeah, Art Landy.
I love Art. Yeah. Ooh,
he was teaching at Cornish, and he did a lot of concerts.
Really?
And and the James Knapp, who recently passed away, the serious composer and organizer of big band music and large ensemble music, really underrated, not really known outside of Seattle. Man, Jim Knapp was just another guy who was, I thank God for these people, that I got to have some kind of, there was enough of them to just help give me the crumbs that would lead me to where it really took off with Blackwell and Bill Lowe and David Beinman and Bill Barron and all that. So Beinman was really important to me, and in fact, playing David Beinman's senior, he did 2 concerts in 87 and 88. And I remember or was it just one? I remember we did a concert, and the band was David, Wes Brown was on bass, me on drums, Wes too, another guy. He's on Anthony Davis's records in the 70s, and Jay Hogarth, and super interesting human being and great musician with a unique approach. And to hear Wes as a rhythm section with Royal Hartigan, 2 guys who really deeply studied, the music of Asante, Ga, Ewe, these musics from Ghana, what's now Ghana and Togo. They were very deep, and they'd also studied Indian music and stuff. They can just go into this stuff that's like, wow. this ain't jazz like anything else I ever heard before. They're really deep, and they're interesting too, because they're really like, they're not into the what I call the jazz industrial complex. They got their own, you know, relationship with that and criticism. But so David Byman, Wes Brown, me, Joe Fonda. There were two bassists. Joe Fonda lived in Middletown, and I just was hanging with Joe, and we're talking about playing. I was just hanging with Joe recently because he played at a Soup and Sound on July 6th. And the other person in that band was Leo Smith, who lived in New Haven, Connecticut. And so then that playing with Leo, he didn't say anything or do much, but through his, I shouldn't say do much, because he did a lot, but through his horn and by listening, I learned so much in like one concert playing with Leo, and then doing another one a year later when I was a senior. I was graduating from college, and I wasn't a music major, and everybody around me was doing senior concerts and senior projects. I was kind of jealous because I was going to graduate without having done anything big. So the first concert of my own compositions I ever did was, I decided I was going to do this. I was going to write 2 sets worth of music and lead a band, and the band was going to be Leo Smith, Wes Brown, and David Byman and me.
Wow.
So we did that in May of 1988.
Wow.
And fortunately, I recorded that one, and I used the cassette from that gig. Got me a lot of grant. I used that for my grants right away for my first 5 years. So that kind of paid off that way. But more important, it just playing with Leo. That was before he got the name Wadada. That was like the next year or something. So I played with Leo. He was in my band like 2 or 3 times. It was just, he was so deep, and he was, we'd be on one level doing stuff, and I'd be so excited with so much adrenaline. I was able to do things that I'd never been able to do before, like play faster with one hand or do this or that. And I was just on another plane. But we might be doing one thing, and then Leo, he would be playing, but you might not hear him. And then he'd wait for this other stuff to subside. And while it came down, he'd stay the same place. But now he had a whole nother trajectory going. That was one of the things I remember. He was operating on a lot of levels and using so many, dynamics and kind of extended technique sounds. And of course he had such a beautiful tone, and he was very melodic in his way. Anyway, he was living in New Haven. His career wasn't very happening at that point. So he was around and accessible. So I remember hanging out with him in a little place in New Haven, listening to Coltrane. And another time I went down, he lived in Brooklyn, and I came down to Brooklyn, and I think he was working at the Tower Records by Lincoln Center at that point. But then he started getting teaching gigs. So, and I've later met people who studied with him at these places. I think Bard might have been the first one. And then he went down to Florida, where Phil Gelb and Matt Sperry, I know they met him there. And I don't know when he wound up at Cal Arts. He was there for a long time.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, I think Zorn played a really important role for him by putting out his records. And I don't know, I may be wrong, but my feeling is that Zorn's record label and Zorn's vision gave Leo Wadada a new level of visibility and he just,
then he went,
I can't remember if he won a MacArthur Award or he almost got the Pulitzer, or he's been, I was so happy for him after seeing him working at the record store and playing with me. He's such a great musician. Wow. But so those are kind of the ways I got started composing and meeting Myra, Chris, Briggan, Eyvind, Dresser. Dresser was such a great guy, so cool. Yeah. He's, I've had periodically, I remember just asking him something about extended, because later it was when I played with Dresser on my own record. That was before I got into extended techniques. What specifically, I was in improvisation from playing with Leo, but I didn't really have it that together. And I'd play with free improvisers in Seattle. And I found them kind of they were kind of purists about what improvisation meant, and they were, I found them kind of off-putting, and part of it was that they had really gotten into kind of the European stream of free improvisation, and I had not. I was purely coming at it from the jazz, AACM, and the jazz kind of thing. And so I was on the edge of their thing, but they had another attitude that it still actually bothers me, but it does not bother me. But their influences they're talking about, like Pietro Kowald and Joel Leandra and Hans Reichel, Jaap Blanc. You know, I still never really listened to a lot of Brotzman or Evan Parker, but you know, I've heard them live and stuff, and they're amazing. But trying to think of who else. But it was I had a gig in Vancouver playing with Wally Shoup, and who's a saxophone player from the who was associated with LaDonna Smith and Davy Williams from the American South. And Wally Shoup I'd played with on and off. He was one of these Seattle improvisers who I didn't always we'd connect, but this was after I moved to New York. I went back and I wanted to play with Wally, and just to drive to Vancouver and back with him, I needed to talk to him more and see what he was up to. Wally's in really bad health as we speak, so my heart goes out to Wally, and I need to send him some more video of some music and stuff. He's in Seattle. So our gig in Vancouver was with Wally and the cello player Peggy Lee, and then her husband Dylan Vanderscafe, the drummer.
Yeah, the drummer. Yeah.
And I knew all these Vancouver musicians because I used to go up to the Vancouver Festival in my years living in Seattle, because the Vancouver Festival was just so amazing.
Oh man, yeah, that's one of the best.
And there was so little interchange between Seattle because of the goddamn international border. It was so difficult. I know for Canadians to come into the U.S., I don't know exactly what their deal was. Our deal to go to Canada as a musician, there were stories of people getting their cars impounded and their drum set impounded. And so basically, I'm not going to say what our tactics on this video, what our tactics were to get through and around that system, but they're pretty funny. And it only became more complicated once there was social media. This kind of stuff was, you know, the web and emails still weren't really a thing while I was living in Seattle, so that was okay. But it was starting to become a thing, I think, maybe in 2002. Yeah. So I forget what we did, but we had a way. I played up there. I had to do it a couple times too. We played another thing with Guy Klushevich, the accordion player, and Amy Donato. Oh, that Chem Zafir was living in. He's in like Toronto now, or Hamilton, Ontario, or something. But he was in Vancouver at the time, and he had a accordion festival. But for, you know, it wasn't just accordion. It was Guy and Amy and Jessica Lurie, my dear Seattle and Wesleyan friend, who plays saxophones. They were on it, and Francois Hull was on it, and I forget who else, but that was one of those times. But the border was always just such a drag to deal with all this grassroots stuff and getting to know people. But I wasn't going to let that get in my way. Like, I wanted to connect, and I knew there were the festival that Ken Pickering and those guys ran up there.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
I'm really lucky that was around for me. I'd go for 2 or 3 days and sleep in my car, and I'd go to as many events as I could, you know. And probably the third day, I'm sure I needed a shower because this was like June or July, but I'd go up to the ski area, sleep in the parking lot. So it was really fun when I came back with Jason Hwang in, I think it was 2009, to play there. That felt like a little victory. But shit, what was I going to say about all this stuff? Meeting Jason, maybe.
Jason, yeah.
So anyway, there's all this stuff, and the extended techniques was also part of it. I'll say extended techniques first, and then meeting Jason. So I went up to this gig in Vancouver in 2002 with Wally to play with Peggy, and Dylan made this killer fish curry, and we ate, and their house was so energized because Dylan and Peggy had been involved in all this Vancouver festival stuff with all these interesting Europeans. The other bass player too, composer, I can't think of his name, who's married to Maya Homburger for some reason. Barry Guy.
Oh yeah, Barry Guy, sure, yeah.
They had all this energy, and so we were in it. Then we got to the gig, and Peggy forgot her pickup, so she was gonna have to play cello acoustically. And so me, with my jazz chops and playing the drum set all these years, but being in Seattle, that was the first time I'd started played with a cello player. I'd never played with a cello player until, by the time I lived in Seattle, there were creative people coming out of that world. And I'd never played with cello, violin, viola, bassoon, oboe, French horn, none of that. And cello to me was really exotic and kind of scary. Like, wow, that's like, again, like sort of like real musicians play that, and I play drums. But at that point in Vancouver, I'd already played with Brent Arnold a lot, and I'd played with Laurie Goldston a bit, and there are some other cello players in Seattle I'd played with, but I knew from experience that if the cello wasn't amplified, it just, I couldn't play quiet enough with drumsticks, and any of that kind of the stuff I'd been doing, learned from Blackwell and Dave Coleman, and since I started taking lessons in 1979. So like 89, it's like 20 years of experience, and I've made a couple records at this point. So I'm thinking I'm kind of know what I'm doing. But so Peggy's got her thing. I'm just like, shit, like she's really the one I really wanted to play with on this gig. And now this is happening. And I was like, man, one of the real great drummers, not me, but like someone like Jack DeJohnette, or, for some reason I was thinking of Terry Clark, or I think maybe I saw Tony Marino play some really awesome stuff, creative, awesome stuff at Mario Pavone's club in Connecticut once. I've seen, guys like that who are really, really happening creative stuff. They'd find a way to make really good music. But I'm not Jack DeJohnette or Terry Clark or Tony Marino, but then I was like, maybe I'll copy what I think they would do. I'll just copy that. So I started like shaking the floor tom and shaking the other drums and scraping with my nails, and or I'd put some stuff on the things and drag it around, and also I would lay out. I think at that point or maybe I discovered the beauty and power of silence for extended periods, which is really a radical thing for a jazz drummer, because we're playing all the fucking time while the other people solo, and then they come out. So we're used to being busy and creating events and all, kind of being very clever about it, and never a dull moment. But anyway, it went. I felt it went really well, and occasionally we would play loud too, because Wally, he could really honk. And two drummers, me and Dylan. But I felt this other, because I knew all these sounds from growing up around the drum set, with a drum set in my living room and playing it. I knew if you bump into it, it makes a sound, or if you drag it on the floor, it makes maybe the head will vibrate and make a sound, or maybe the legs will bounce up and down, or you could take a cymbal off and put it on a drum, and even more than feeling like the gig was a success. And we had a gig the next night in Seattle with Michael Bizio and Jim Horst on guitar, who's really great. And that gig was even better. My first time back in New York, back in Seattle, since I moved to New York, and like 70 people came to the Polestar Gallery, totally packed for free improv. It was happening, and I was great. And I played, now 2 nights in a row. So that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a big tour. Anyway, I felt that I had really touched an iceberg, just the tip of the iceberg, with another approach to playing that would be not rooted in rhythm and conventional drum technique, but rooted in silence or quiet micro sounds you can't hear in a band, or it required a whole different context. And fortunately, Peggy's forgetting her pickup that night provided this other context and this opportunity for me to engage in music in a whole different way. So I'm really grateful for that, and it opened a world, and it led to some other stuff. So then I started that was the first point I was really interested in extended techniques, and 2 of the real major developments for me were starting to use a bow on metal and different objects, and also then a bit later blowing and figuring out how to use a drum as a wind instrument. And part of what was incredible about these things was just it allowed me, without having intended this, it allowed me to operate in the realm of pitch and harmony, and also to sustain tones and shape them over the duration of their tone. Whereas, percussion, you hit something once and then it's gone. Then the natural physical properties of that mechanism control the rest. After you initiate the sound or something, that's it. But with blowing, if I can start the sound and then do different things with my mouth, my embouchure, my tongue, I can sing into it. I can have the object. I mean, what I do, if people haven't seen it, it's actually a faucet escutcheon from a construction job that I did. And that's a whole nother story of my life, construction. But I place this thing, it's like a bell, and I blow into the top of it. And I have another bell that I use as a node, similar to how a guitar player will have a glass bottle on their finger and slide it up and down the neck of a guitar. I slide this other bell on the drum head, on a floor tom head, and while I blow into this drum, the air not the drum, I blow into this little bell-like thing on the drum head, and then the air pressure builds up, and then air escapes between the drum head and the escutcheon, and it makes the drum head, it produces amazing sounds, like all documented on the first piece of The Drum, and I'm sure other places. I'm kind of overdue to do more of it, because actually the blowing thing didn't develop until after I'd done my first solo record. So maybe it was like I started getting into it like 2008, 2009. First solo record, which is called Renditions, it came out in 2009. So anyway, that kind of stuff opened up a whole nother world, sustaining tones and being able to interact in bands with other instruments in different ways really opened up stuff for me to play with just about anybody. And with the silences and the quiet, that was still pretty unusual for a drummer. And it's still confusing to people because I do a gig, and if I play a bossa nova or play swing, like I did when Howard Johnson played at Soup and Sound a few years ago, or other places, the people who know my more experimental avant-garde shit, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know you played jazz." I'm like, "Yeah, man, I've been playing jazz since the 70s. I studied with Ed Blackwell, and I love it." But and then I'll play with the other people. I'll play the avant-garde stuff, and the other people are like, "Whoa, what's that?" And but it's cool. I mean, yeah. So Jason, unless you have other question first, I'll start talking about Jason.
Let's go to Jason. Yeah.
Okay. So back to David Byman. David Byman set up a session at his house, his apartment. I think it was at Park Slope at the time. Maybe it was Sunset Park. So this is Brooklyn. David Byman's this interesting saxophone player, composer who I go way back with. Great guy and teacher and mentor to me. Only 2 years older, but really pivotal guy for me. So he invited me to play at this thing. And so I remember Jeff Hoyer, the trombone player, played with Cecil Taylor. He was there. Maybe Jeff was a Bennington guy. I can't think of the connections because David grew up in Bennington and was connected with Bill Dixon and this. And so maybe Jeff Hoyer was part of that. Jeff passed away, man, 15, 20 years ago now. No, not 20, more like 15. I think maybe Adam Lane, the bass player, was there. He and I are about the same age, and we were both at Wesleyan at the same time. I'm a couple of years ahead of him, but he's great, and I've been playing with him on and off. In fact, we're on a record with Adam Lane and I, and Carol Leibowitz, the piano player, made a record. It came out like it might have been last year.
I really have to find it. Okay.
2022, 2021. It's all improvised. It's called, I forget what it's called. It's really good. It's Carol's amazing, and it's always a treat to play with someone I've known as long as Adam, and whose playing I respect as much as I respect his. He's such a beautiful player. He was there, and it was like 7 people. Stephen Haynes might have been there. I don't know, the piano player who used to tune piano who died, Mark Hennon, he might have been there. I can't remember, but Jason Hwang was there, and I'd never met him. I'd heard him play with Butch Morris circa 1988 for several consecutive days at this space by Grand Central Station. And that was my first time hearing a lot of New York people. Like in that band were J.A. Dean, Zena Parkins, Brandon Ross. I think Tom Varner might have been in it. Jerry Hemingway might have been in it. And they had a special guest that week who was Arthur Blythe. So I knew Arthur from hearing the Jack DeJohnette concert, and also from records. So that was really just fabulous to hear Arthur with that group. But so I got a really good education in Butch Morris and conduction, and did I say J.A. Dean? He was one of them. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the others. But so that was like 88. And so then go forward to, so it would have been probably 2003.
Okay. Well,
maybe 2002. Then we're in this at David Byman's house. And I don't know, I just played and was very serious. I guess maybe I was not in a mood to like try to network or be some kind of personality. I just was like quiet and all business. And I guess something about that. Jason called me up pretty soon after that, and he's like, "You want to do a gig with my band is called the Far East Side Band, and it's Joe Daly on tuba, Song on Park on Kayagum and Ajong, and also singing, and Jason on violin." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I played turns out the Far East Side Band had been in existence for previous years, and they'd played in China and in Russia and Europe, and Satoshi Takeshi was the usual drummer. But this was, I don't know, Satoshi probably couldn't make the gig. I never asked Jason. But so Jason asked me to play, and I did. And that was really cool. And then, but that was the last gig the Far East Side Band ever did. But then pretty soon Jason called again, and this time he was going to start a new group called Edge with Taylor Ho Bynum and Ken Filiano. And I was like, oh, awesome. Yeah, sure. I'm up for that. And I'd met Taylor because he was also a student of Bill Lowe's. And Taylor was, but I'm like 10 or 15 years older than Taylor. So he wasn't at Wesleyan when I was, but I got a gig to take a group to Wesleyan to play for like my 15th year reunion. So that also would have been 2003. And the group was Jenny Scheinman, Brad Shepik, I think Adam Lane, and me. Might have been a different bass player, but Adam was there. And anyway, because I think maybe Adam played in the group that Taylor was part of. Maybe Iran Alicia was drumming. I can't remember. It was kind of a few groups, and they had some money, so we came up from New York. I was playing a lot with Jenny back then.
Really? Oh, wow.
And we'd been in a group in the Seattle days, and all this was before iPhone documentation and before recording became cheap, so it was undocumented. But Jenny was, when she moved to New York, she was one of my main people. We'd do sessions and had a good time. So what was I going to say about all this? So that's how I met Taylor too. That's what I was going to say. And so I'd met Taylor this one time, and now Jason's doing a group. And because Taylor had come up with, Taylor's mentor was Bill Lowe when Taylor was in high school in Boston. Bill Lowe probably connected him to Wesleyan. Yeah. And Taylor and I had so much in common as far as like, we both loved the James Jabbo Ware, Me, We, and Them ensemble. And all our experience with Bill Lowe and our perspective, Bill Lowe had taught us a lot, and Taylor and I still connect around, various things about the how jazz is taught at the university level. Yeah. And there was this whole other thing with Warren Smith, Bill Lowe, Bill Dixon, Archie Shepp, and the UMass Amherst guys, Youssef. I'm sure there's others, but there's kind of this line up the Connecticut River Valley that if you extend it, hits where Warren was teaching in Long Island. Yeah. So Taylor and I talk about that and are very aware of this and think it's cool and kind of neglected. Anyway, Jason started this group Edge, and I'd heard Ken Filiano play a few times, so he was somebody I knew of, and actually we played once around 1989 at Wesleyan, because he was on tour with Vinnie Gallia and this trombone player John Rapson.
Sure.
Oh God, is he still around, or I think he might have passed away.
I think he passed away. Yeah.
I hate to say that if he didn't. I think he did. So John, they knew each other from LA. John was played with Tim Byrne and Vinny, and was he might be on the early Tim Byrne records. I can't remember. But so John set up a gig with Vinny's group, and then John put together a group of us from around Wesleyan. And so the Rapson group played, and then Gallia's group played, and then we all did something at the end. So I'd had a brief encounter with Filiano and the drummer Grover Mooney, who was really great. And that was the first time I ever encountered Vinny. We'd crossed paths several times over the years, and now I consider him a friend. Still like a hero. Who else was in that? I don't know who else was in that. I'm sure John probably played with those guys. And
sure.
Anyway, so Jason put this group together, and kind of the rest is history. And Jason's been the leader, first a quartet,
and then trio. Yeah.
Taylor moved to New Haven, and it was harder for him to come down and do these, all these gigs for $50 and rehearsals. So then I forget what happened. Steve Swell often would sub for Taylor. And I think then that might have led into the group Sing House, although I'm thinking that came later. Sing House had Steve Swell and Chris Forbes on piano. Great group, man, really fun. And then Jason was also doing this string orchestra with drums. I'm so grateful. Again, I have this thing about strings where growing up, going back to, my mom was into classical music and music from church. I hated that stuff. The way I defined myself growing up was against that kind of culture. So I had nothing, and I was intimidated by it until one of my best friends became a really accomplished harpsichordist and organist. And I still in high school, I'd turn pages for him while he'd play Bach and this stuff. So I started to get into it. He played some Debussy for me and turned me on to Debussy. So that was my beginning of starting to get into classical music, but I had no experience. I'd never played cellos and strings. So Jason started a string orchestra that was kind of based on Butch Morris stuff and based on some Billy Bang stuff. He had started it to play a tribute to Billy Bang after Billy passed. They did it at the Vision Festival. And then it was so good, I guess. I didn't hear it. I wasn't present. I don't think there was a drummer. I'm not sure, but it was so cool. He decided he wanted to do it more, and I became the drummer for that. Just me and a bunch of strings. And oh man, I just every performance we've done is ear candy. It sounds. I love floating among this ocean of strings. I'm just like a kayak sometimes, or sometimes I'm an island, or sometimes I'm a whale or a tugboat or a steamship. But it's just like this whole thing happens, and then Jason gives me the autonomy to do whatever the fuck I want. And so over the years of playing together, he trusts my ear, and so I can kind of just like go into La La Land and do things against what Jason is having the other people doing, or I can lock in, or so I'm just listening and I'm watching his conductions. And I think maybe Ken might be a free agent in this too, because the three of us are so close. We communicate just in this other level. So that's a really fun one. And then we've had several other projects, like more recent. Okay, before the trio, there's also there's been a group with, it was Edge plus Deanna Relier, who is the founder or one of the founding running people, along with David Lynch, not the film David Lynch, but David Lynch in Ann Arbor, of Edge Fest, which is an ongoing Ann Arbor jazz festival, which is really awesome. And I'm sure I've played there 10 times at this point, probably half of those in Jason's bands as a percussionist, and several times as a band leader myself. I'm going back there with the Forest this year. Played with James Illigan Fritz. I played with Joe McPhee. Anyway, we had a project where Deanna, who's a classically trained singer and whose brother also is a professional classical singer, Deanna did poetry by various poets, Lester Affleck, Patricia Spears Jones, and I don't know if Steve Cannon was part of that, but various poets. Deanna sang, and Deanna's husband, who's also a really good friend of ours from all the hanging out in Ann Arbor, Piotr Michalowski, he plays bass clarinet and sopranino sax, and he's also a retired professor of Near Eastern Studies and a really interesting guy. So we made a record, so that whatever that is, 6 or 7 people, and then finally we it became just Jason, Ken, and I playing as a trio, as the Human Rights Trio. So we'd done all this playing in all these other contexts. And there was also ad hoc groups that got put together. Like we played for when Butch Morris is part of it. No, I'm missing up the things because Billy Bang didn't die till later, and Butch Morris led a conduction that Jason was part of and Ken was part of, and Jason got me involved, and Tatsuya Nakatani was another drummer. Butch Morris conducted a piece of Billy's that was set up in the St. Peter's Church, and it was about, I forget what it was called, but it was one of his Vietnam pieces, and there was this conduction happening in it among some instruments, but then me, Nakatani, and I think Newman Baker, we all had bass drums on the periphery of this space. Wow. And we were able to play the bass drums periodically, and it represented, the bombs that you could hear in the background in Vietnam. So there's this one level thing with these low sounds in the background. I don't know. That's just one example of many other things that Jason and Ken and I would be involved in.
Yeah.
And so, I don't really know exactly the story, but at some point, Jason wanted to do a trio with me and Ken. And it was kind of like, oh, yikes. No one else? Like, we're kind of used to doing this with another voice, but okay, trio is a thing. Yeah. And violin, bass, and drums is a thing. So this could work. We'll have to do it. And it was the first gig we did was up in Connecticut. Stephen Haynes put it together outside of Hartford in an art gallery. It was I remember being both stressful and great. Like the stress was just like, man, we're having to fill space in a really different way. It's so much easier having another person, but as a trio, it's really stripped down. And these new tunes, oh my God, I don't really know them yet. And we rehearsed them, but I have to play them. And Jason's tunes are always, I kind of think of them as puzzles. They're quite elaborate,
tricky. Yeah.
Intricate, lengthy, and it doesn't make sense for him to lay out any drum parts. What really makes sense is for him to maybe suggest something, or like just go wild here, or this is more, I'm thinking colors, but just do what you want. They'll do a lot of that. Or sometimes it's really obvious. Okay, we're now swinging, and I'm going to play kind of in a Duke Ellington. I'm going to go with that kind of, oh crap, I can't think of his name. There's one of Duke Ellington's drummers I really love. Not Sonny Payne, but that was bassy. But oh man, he's such a big influence on me. It was one of the later ones, and not Sonny Greer. It's one of the ones from like the 60s.
Yeah,
anyway, I'm not going to try to spend time. Everyone else who sees this will know his name. But sometimes Jason will write something, and to me, it's just like swinging with a backbeat in an Ellington style, or sometimes it's reggae, and so that stuff's kind of clear. But still, I need to make it. That's not the drummer's job to play what you're told. You have to figure out compositionally. You have to what's going on, and you have to hear the harmonies and hear different layers of activity that are going on, and how you're going to interact with that in a way that's going to enhance and supplement and kind of make sense for that in a variety of ways, that maybe you're going to agitate against it, or maybe you're going to really support it and be in the background, or whatever it is. The possibilities are really infinite, and one of the main reasons I love playing with Jason is because he's so productive, and he's presenting these opportunities to engage with his music over and over and over, and not to mention getting to play with him and Ken and the other people in his groups, which is fabulous. But so pretty soon though, the trio went from being like, oh my God, how are we gonna what do we need to do to keep this from dying in the middle, because there's only two of us playing or something. It went to, okay, I can really hear that we've been playing together for 20 years now, or close to it. I can really I was much more able to hear the immediacy of changes of direction, or as soon as Ken does something, I'm saying hearing, but I'm not conscious of it. We are in an altered state together, making this thing happen. And we're a 3-part organism. And if one does something, we feel it affects us. So it's turned out that, I don't know, I love all the groups, but the trio I'm really in love with the trio now. So, and I'll just wait for whatever Jason comes up with next. If he wants to do trio with a horn section or something.
Oh, it's going to be cool. Right? Yeah.
Oh, right. I'm neglected to mention another one of his groups is more of like a non-ed, or it was an octet. It's again Ken and me, but then it was with brass, because it was with Ken and me, Joe Daly, Taylor Hobynum, and Steve Swell or Dick Griffin on trombone, and then Chinese string instruments, Wang Guo Wei on erhu and Sun Li on pipa, and then Jason with his violin and viola, and he can kind of move around with that. So that group, that's just amazing and fun. And I forget what he calls the group exactly, but we did a record called Blood. I forget what it's called. Blood. I think the group has Blood. And then we just played, but we played a different thing without the erhu. Instead,
the Burning Bridge. The Burning Bridge, I think.
Is that Burning Bridge?
Is that
that's Burning Bridge.
So.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly. Yeah, and Jason was really reflecting on his own kind of ancestral, I'll call it ancestral trauma, because his family story, his own personal story, involves his parents coming from China to the United States relatively recently, and during a very traumatic period in China's history. Like his mom was, and I forget what the Burning Bridge story was, but his mom was in Changsha while it was being bombed by the Japanese. I'm assuming this is the late 30s, but it might have been like 42 or something. And so, and she was knocked out. She was in a pharmacy. There was a bomb hit the pharmacy. She was knocked out, and when she came to, she was the only person in the pharmacy still alive. So that was crazy. And then his dad grew up across the place where the Chinese Communist Party had their meetings. So Mao and these other guys. I took a course that studied 20th century Chinese history in college. So Li Dajiao and Zhou Enlai and all these guys. I was like, wow, man, you were there? Oh, it's amazing. So I don't know. I guess he was around that, and then he had some internship right before the Chinese Revolution, and he happened to come to the United States, and then the revolution happened, and he stayed. And anyway, Jason's got deep stories to tell about that. And Burning Bridge and Blood are part of the inspiration for those albums, and those compositions get inspiration from that kind of ancestral experience. And that group's so fun too. Like,
sure.
Getting to hang with Dick Griffin. What a beautiful cat, and his stories, and Joe Daly too.
Oh, sure, man. That's amazing.
With Joe, I've had a number of opportunities to play and interact with him, and those two are really, really fun. And so I don't know, with Jason, we're gonna play at Edgefest again this year as a trio with Ken, and I think we're playing somewhere before that in the New York area. No, or maybe we were rehearsing. I forget. It's sort of
Fantastic.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool.
So, oh man.
Amazing, man. Yeah.
Hell, I can talk about this stuff.
No, but I will slowly. I mean, here it's midnight, and I think my baby will wake me up tomorrow at 6, and it will be like, Daddy. Okay, let's play. Okay. But no, so nice to hear you talk to, man, and to go through some of your stuff, and beautiful. Thanks for sharing some of this.
Yeah, a real pleasure. Congratulations on having a baby.
Yeah, it's fun, man. It's
my youngest is now 15. Although I have a granddaughter, but that's different. But man, it's just starting to get to a point where I've got some space here. I mean, it happened before my youngest was 15, but it's an amazing experience.
It's beautiful, man. It's irreplaceable, really.
Cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be part of this. And
man, Andrew, thanks so much for sharing. And
I told you I saw a few of the other ones around the time you contacted me, and I'll continue to watch more. I think it's a real great.
I love documenting you guys. Like you said, I just when you said it's about learning, and it's just like this personal contact, but also archiving in a way. What so very many of you have done. Like hopefully in 20 years, whenever, if this still exists.
It's funny. I never even talked about my nonprofit, and I'm not going to start now. But part of it is like, I think it's so important to archive and document the stuff that's going on, not let the publicists and the kind of the jazz industrial complex be in charge of controlling the history and controlling what's going on, because there's
oh man, we could dig into this topic, and that's
hours.
Terrible. Yeah, that's terrible, man.
It's important, and I play with it, and many aspects of it, I'm fully a participant with. But I'm so glad you're doing this, and I do video interviews myself with people, and I'm archiving those. I haven't made them public at all, but
Yeah, I like that. Being a musician and also listening to you guys, and it's just it's beautiful to do that. So, but Andrew, man, if you're ever in Europe, drop me a line.
Totally.
We have a guest room here in our house. If you need to stay, you can hang, enjoy the wine, food, whatever. So let me know if you're around. We can.
One of my Seattle friends has been living in Ljubljana for like
20
years, something. So, I had a great time hanging with her way back then. And I'm glad to know I've got some more. And
drop me a line.
I hope to see people I haven't seen in a long time.
So. Cool.
Thank you. Thanks for the interview. This was really fun.
Thanks, Andrew. Right. Yeah. Bye. Ciao. Ciao.
Dr. Jazz.